or grow it. From the Stash Podcast.
Thank you, AC Infinity, for sponsoring today's video. If you're looking for new pots, consider checking out AC Infinity's Fabric Smart Pots. Their heavy-duty material is crafted with double-stitched nylon handles and 500-gram thick non-woven fabric that makes a permeable, tear-proof wall for excess water draining and maximum stability. If you want to check out their pots, go to acinfinity.com, use promo code THESTASH15, and consider saving a few dollars and getting yourself some quality pots.
This episode is brought to you by Stash Blend. I've been using Stash Blend for over a year now, and it's awesome. One of the things that I really like is that it saves me money. It's a whole bunch of different inputs in one. So I no longer have to go out there and buy a silica bottle, then a separate seaweed bottle, beneficial bacteria, then a separate one for mycorrhizal fungi. All of that plus more is in this one blend. Go to stashblend.com to learn more about it, and I also have a link down in the YouTube description section below.
Boys, welcome back.
Another in-person episode?
We didn't touch. Boom.
Yeah.
We need to
I'm
like
trying
announce
make
it.
so that's a thing.
Did we tell people that that's all we're doing?
We gotta announce it for the audio folks. People that aren't actually watching us, right?
Oh,
They're
yeah, you
on
guys
the audio
don't realize that
platforms.
we're all literally touching right now.
Yeah.
And we're all touching.
Yeah.
We're all connected.
The whole time. You don't know our feet are all overlapped.
Footsies, playing
we
footsies.
just
Pee
play
on the
footsies.
electric fence.
I'm trying not to. Man.
Yeah, man. In Eppies. Or
It's
in
good to be
Eppies.
back. The only thing that I never miss whenever we come here is the cost of everything.
Well, it's funny.
Everything,
It's
bro.
funny because like housing is very
To
comparable.
get you here,
to
flights
where
here are
I
pretty
live.
cheap and housing is cheap.
Flights are cheap, and then it's like once you get here, they're like, everything's
fools.
more expensive.
Yeah, food prices out of control.
Crazy.
For
Dude,
sure.
I got a breakfast Sammy this morning. Mind you, just a breakfast sandwich. Eggs, bacon, sandwich. $19. What the heck? Like literally.
Well, that was DoorDash, a little bit increase in
I
prices.
got DoorDash in my neck of the woods too. And I've never had a $19 breakfast sandwich. But you know, this is just where we're at.
Well, I picked a quality place for you guys. I want
was-
nothing
it was
but the best for you
it
guys.
was
That
a
is true.
slap in
That is
breakfast.
true. That is true. I think it's just really is about experience. That's a big thing with the Nevada area in general, whether it be nature experience or like recreational fun. Like there's just a lot of good experiences
Oh,
here.
it's gorgeous out here, man. There's so many things to do.
This place used to be so cheap. We're in Las Vegas. It used to be known as being one of the places where you can go get a cheap breakfast in the morning, you know what I mean, on the strip. Now everything's so expensive. They've increased prices. You used to be able to park at parking garages for free. Every single one used to be free. Now everyone charges. So it's like the cost
getting
of
that
living
bag out
here
here.
has increased quite a bit. And these guys,
We're feeling
weren't
it.
happy about the food prices because we get hit hard with the food
Thankfully,
prices.
that From the Stash company takes care of most of our stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shout out to From the Stash. The breakfast was brought to you by From the Stash.
Yeah.
They removed the stress from that worry. A little
It was
bit less
a
stressful.
precise technique though, and it pushed me to a level of success. And it makes it so today I'm feeling very energized and I'm ready. You know, I'm ready to go. Motivated, and that's what it takes.
It's a great segue. I like how you did that with the precision and the stress. You know what? I feel like we could almost turn that into a conversation in regards to, you know, precise stress training
Or
for
like
your plant.
precision stress techniques.
Oh, that's pretty good.
We got $1 million hit right
go.
there, boys.
Let's do it. What
Let's
do you think
do
we
it.
can What do
I
you think
think-
we can bring for that?
You know, honestly, man, a lot of people don't realize some of the stuff they're doing could be done in a more precise method to be able to utilize the growth stage that you're in to get the most explosive growth or to get the best yield, let's say, so to speak. Some people are just like, well, again, this is what I got to do because this is what you got to do for plants. You know, is there anything that you guys do in particular that's your holy grail, the one thing that you always make sure you do for a quality technique that technically does apply stress to the plant, but that you guys always do? Knock it off to Christopher.
Drought stress.
Drought stress.
Yeah, drought stress is one of the ones. Mostly with the synthetic inputs, but you can do it with the organics. Now, generally speaking, you want to keep the medium moist at all times for proper organic breakdown. So doing those dry backs with an organic regimen is arguably a little bit, not very as good, but the stress can help create some more secondary metabolites, right? Those trichlomes that we are all
Trichrones?
Yeah, of the strand, strand trichlome.
Different strands of trichrones. It's interesting because like a lot of people don't think about that fact that some of these things that are done to the plant is the plant reacting as a defense mechanism. So the drought is the plant trying to stay alive is going to produce more of these metabolites to be able to give itself the life to live. Same with when you're bending and breaking and twisting, there's a knot in that area when you're doing that. So what the hell? Like, well, this is done so it yields more. It's like, no, this is the reaction from this stress, this precise stress technique that you're giving this plant to give it this interesting reaction. Drybacks is a prime example. A lot of people swear that's a part of crop steering, is if you're not utilizing drybacks by making sure that your root system is kind of working and thriving in there, not lazy roots, so to speak, you're not going to get those big, massive plants that you'd see in commercial facilities. And that's why a lot of times you'll see a tiny little container, and somehow these plants are huge. They're bigger than us. But it's because they're utilizing high-frequency fertigation and drybacks. Now, with drybacks, you can't just like put your finger in and be like, yeah, it's good. Usually you need moisture meters, something in there that'll tell you where it's at. Not always. You can just look at it as every couple days you're watering to make sure it's getting that full moisturize and then drying back process. But the best I've seen is when there's a moisture meter. Do you utilize moisture meters at all?
I just get my hands on the EcoWit one.
Ooh,
Yeah, you guys heard about that one?
You're stunting now?
It's you can see the moisture level on an app on your phone or iPad, whatever you hook it up to.
That's
And
baller.
that way you can know exactly when level's low. You just add in water.
Dude, that's the way the future right
Future
there.
moisture
That's the way. People
Digital
everyone
moisture
yeah.
meters.
I got a probe.
Probe, yeah.
You just jam her down into the pot, into the mix, and it'll tell you what's your pH of the
Old
mixes,
school.
and-
I know
yeah.
exactly
Probe
what
it.
you're talking about. Yeah.
It works.
Great.
Don't get me wrong,
I
but
use
the
it in
ones
my front yard too.
see, and that's
When
where
I
people
need to water my
utilize
grass.
this. Well, people utilize these things in other agriculture, traditional agriculture.
Yeah.
It's only on our
Precision.
plant that there's been not so much focus on it. By utilizing moisture meters, it can help you for a wide variety of things, but you can't get a proper dryback, in my opinion, without proper measurements of where it needs to be. I've seen in commercial facilities, they'll do like roughly a 30% dryback is what they aim for, and which is great to do. They'll notice that those roots will just explode when you transplant some of these plants. Like the roots look like just white. There's no media, all white. Like it's insane. Traditionally, like Chris was saying, this is going to be with synthetics predominantly. I've never seen it any other way, but this is where you have that full control of your grow. And I think people who are utilizing this method may not necessarily be novices. They're not new growers. Usually this is kind of like blue belt, a little bit higher up. So to start with, this is precision stress technique. This may be the one you're focusing on versus 5 or 6 different things where it's like, holy shit, my plant's stressed, you know?
A lot of people doing it without even realize they're doing it. You
Yeah,
know, like
letting the plants
they're
dry out.
Yeah, letting the plants dry out between waterings, right? That's a form of precision stress. I think, P, you do that, right? It was like you wait 2-3 days before watering, right? When you water the plant, get the medium nice and moist, then it'll start to dry out. A couple days later, then the plant maybe gets to the point where it starts to droop a little bit, right? It's dry. The medium's dry and now needs to be resaturated. So
The advantages of not using organic.
Essentially,
I
yeah,
can't
because you
let
can't let those microbes die. I mean, if you dry out that environment, the ecosystem in your soil, like your super soil, that's when you're going to lose some of the benefits to it. If you're using peat moss with some extra food that you're adding in with bottled-based nutrients, like you can kind of freestyle your dry back a little bit more versus, again, with cocoa,
It's not as volatile.
not as volatile, but like you can still, the precise side of things is that measurement, you know, to be able to have to measure a specific amount. Like I was literally seeing on you know, testing the difference of yields of, you know, 50, 60% by dialing in the dryback to the T.
wow.
It's crazy, man. Like the science of some of this stuff is really there. And that's why you see commercial agriculture utilizing, you know, very high-end measurements and very high-end tracking of everything. Analytics is everything. And I think there's areas that are improving in this, but the top ones that I'm seeing is like Pulse app. They've got one, but you're still hitting near like $700 to get the whole unit. So it's not for your beginner grower or your hobbyists, so to speak, you know?
So when should you be doing these drybacks? You know, I think a lot of people are going to say flower only. You know, mostly flower. When there's trichomes on the plant, we're trying to get more secondary metabolites to come out, right? That's where you're going to get your most bang for your buck, right? If you're drying out a seedling, you're at risk of losing that seedling, for example. Veg, arguably not really much of a benefit there as much of a benefit as flowering, of course. So.
100% flower is going to be your main point of doing it. What you're doing in this case isn't always increasing your yield, but again, increasing those trichomes, increasing your overall quality. There is science to it, and I think that when you're very precise when you do it, you're not just freestyling like, I'll let my plants dry out for a couple of days. You need to make sure that your roots aren't being oversaturated and waterboarded, obviously, so you still want to dry your plants out, but it's super important once you get into flower to start utilizing this technique. That's when I've seen the best. You know.
Yeah.
What's something else that? Well, sorry,
That was it. I was going to move on. You guys kind of did that one really well. I can't add anything more to that. When it comes to like precision growth techniques, I think it's really important to be precise on the square footage or the canopy space of your particular plants. I think it can be difficult to try to harness. You know, you got a 4x4 tent. It's like a rule of thumb is like you should be able to get 4 plants in there. Well, you know, it depending on the foliage, depending on the size of those plants, you might only get 2. You might only be able to get 3 because in my opinion, I don't want any of my plants touching each other. I want space between all the plants, and that allows me to
plant segregation. Okay.
Right? Yeah. It's something I practice. No.
I'm all for segregation.
Yep.
For plants.
For plants, of course. In this way, I can keep the environment around those plants a little more precise. I don't need to worry about overlapping. I don't need to worry about these plants possibly passing things to each other. If there was, say, pests in one, pests in the other, it allows for circulation to move through the plants. More importantly, it allows me to get in and out of my tent so that I can tend to these plants, whether I'm taking the plants in or out. Just kind of having a good idea of the overall space that the plant's going to take up as a whole, I think is really important to just understanding how to keep things. I don't want to keep using the word precise, but it's like I just want to keep things honed in and kind of specific for that.
Kind of like canopy management, I feel like is a big thing there because like could be many plants, it could be a few. For me, I try to heavily focus on doing some super cropping or bending to make sure that I fill up what the canopy would be, whether it's 2 plants, 4 plants, 5 plants, 6 plants, no matter what. By the time I'm about 4 weeks of veg, where some people may flip into a flower point, which I would never, but small enough plant where I've got tops that are already developing from bending and working the plant or topping it, that's when I'm going to make sure I start doing these precise bending techniques and with the super cropping essentially. I'm bending, snapping, breaking, and making sure that they fill out my space before we're flipping to flower. Now, if it's a new cultivar, I'm just going to probably put more plants in to fill up my canopy. If it's something I've been growing for a while, I'm immediately getting to the point where I never let the plants extend past a certain height because I know they're going to double. So it's right away I'm going into super cropping my plants, and that helps me modify my canopy.
Yeah, and in order to keep that concise, I do that super cropping to every single branch that I'm going to maintain on that plant. That way I can put those branches exactly where I want them, along the trellis or just in the canopy as a whole.
Yeah, bend and manipulate them exactly how the growth needs to go.
Every single one. Yeah, I got to get your fingers on those ones because I feel, and it's not just anecdotal, but I'm really noticing the more hands-on that you can get with these stems, it's no coincidence that the more manipulation and training, the bigger and hardier these plants become. So that allows me to create that ecosystem within that canopy. So if I've got 2 plants in a tent or 3 plants, that plant is its own structure and can hold and bear its own fruits with a technique that I think you can apply to every single branch. So yeah, that's super cropping, or also known as like the Cushman chiropractics. I know super cropping, I feel that you're a little more aggressive with the branch, with more of the breaking.
And bend and pop.
With the chiropractics, you're really just twisting the
making it malleable more, making it so you can bend.
The stomata. What's the what's the outer wall of the stem called?
Sure. You're cracking it essentially.
Yeah, you're breaking that membrane. Yeah.
No, with doing. He was giving him his tips.
Yeah.
With that though, that's where it's like, again, depending on the cultivar, but I feel like if I'm going to be focusing on canopy management and I'm not doing a scrog technique, I have to do that every time because the plants get too tall. They'll bend up too tall, and unless I'm using something like bamboo or stakes to hold up these wispy stems that aren't developed and thick, I got to make sure they're hardy and thick, and that's where you get that knuckle kind of build up.
And I'm super cropping to you're talking the level of the canopy. That's when I'm going to go,
yeah,
to take that right down.
Exactly, I'm breaking that wrist.
Yeah, I'm going all
limp wrist.
Yeah.
And I notice some people don't focus on that as much. They'll just focus on balancing that canopy out. Do you do any super cropping? Yeah.
I was just about to raise my hand right there. Yeah. I don't really do much super cropping, only in flower when I'm getting during that stretch period when I don't have any other option. I can't do any more low stress training at that point, and those branches are dominating. I will super crop, flop that branch down, allow the other branches to catch up to that one. So that I am using super cropping then. But another high stress training technique that I'm using is topping. A lot of people use topping, right? That's
That'd
a precision stress technique.
Yeah, want to be your other
technically,
canopy
right?
management. You want to stop it from growing up. You want to go
Exactly. So I'd usually top at the 4th or 5th node most of the time, and then allowing those lower branches to grow up. So that is technically a precision stress technique, right? You're doing something, you're stressing the plant in a way to manipulate the plant for its benefit.
Well, and it's when you do it too. I think that's the thing is some people will like multi-topping. We talked about a few episodes back that they'll take it and they're using this to know like, hey, I'm trying to extend this 4x4. So I'm going to top it now. And 2 weeks later, as it just barely starts to grow more, I'm going to top her again. And then I'm going to top in 3 weeks when it gets to this point. So the point it just keeps stretching and stretching. And that way you're going to get this crazy, massive pancake plant that you have enough time to train and manipulate to work because that canopy isn't going up, it's going sideways. And more people do that, I feel. I'm very big on cultivar specific. Some I feel like I don't need to do that. Others I feel like I have to because it's just this narrow Slenderman. With the Chilled OG is a prime example. That one was bushy. Like I've seen 2 out of 4 that I had top were like self-topped. Like they started out and they just branched. And I was like, whoa, was I really high the other day and just did this? I'm like, no, I mark everything down. Like it must have happened. Then I saw somebody in our Discord and from the Stash Discord, like this one's self-topped.
F3s, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I looked for, and the parents were showing
the morphology and how it grows.
That smaller, more squat plant, bushier plant, easier to train, in my opinion. I chose that, and so it's not surprising that
really
you're seeing
shows.
that in the F3s.
Yeah, it really shows. And what's crazy though is then you don't necessarily need to focus so much on the precision technique. It's doing it naturally for you. It's only once you get in that canopy management stage, you're in a tent or limited space. You can't just keep letting that plant grow because it can potentially 50% to 100% increase in size. So you have to do something for canopy management. A lot of people also wouldn't necessarily call this maybe high stress of utilizing the scrog technique or screen and green. The amount of bending and twisting and popping and working that you still do end up doing some of these Cushman chiropractics or the super cropping based on having to tuck it when it's all big, like standing up a foot above the canopy, somebody will just and weave it through. That's something that you can't just willy-nilly. You have to do that with timing. You have to make sure you know that when you flip to flower, this plant is stuck in this net. It cannot go any other place. You can't just move it to the side or grab it. As I've done before, I've taken a bamboo stick and made like a tomato cage so that I can work it through and flatten it out a little bit. You can't do that once you're already utilizing some of these techniques and you're in a trellis net. Now, I feel like some people will utilize the double stack trellis nets and then work some of these precision stress techniques and using topping, and that's how they fill the canopy. Do you see a difference or a better argument for topping versus something like super cropping or low stress training even? Is there anything like reason why you specifically would be like, nah, I'm not bending and popping, I'm topping?
Morphology of the plant, really. Longer, stretchier plants, sativa-like, I like to top. Because I have other plants in the same tent that are indicas.
Short little squatties.
Quote, air quotes right here, indica morphology, right? We
little snooky plants.
Had a conversation about indica versus sativa, but smaller, squattier, bushier stuff, I don't top as often, It would be just the sativa-like, long, stretchier ones where I'll top. And
makes sense. I feel like a lot of people will do things just because you have to, like I said a few times in a past episode. Topping is something that I feel like can be utilized alongside some of the other techniques.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be just one, so people will be like, I just low stress train or I just top. It's like, you could do it all and have a freak of nature. I know I've seen pigeons plants before, a whole plant underneath one light and it fills the whole entire tent. Like you have to do these kind of techniques to be able to get a plant that's going to be hardy enough to yield like a pound of light or more, 3 of light, to be able to get the structure of that plant before the buds will even form. I think with training your plants, it's all about timing, knowing that impact of the recovery time. It's not just, we're done. Doing the super cropping later in flower, you may not get the impact of super cropping that somebody did for training in veg. Yeah, you're bending the plant down, but getting that big thick knuckle to develop before the flower grows, maybe that doesn't have the time to heal. So do you give a healing time in between the techniques, or do you just you're doing it as you're doing it, again, kind of willy-nilly? A little willy-nilly. It doesn't hurt, so to speak, but just going into the commercial settings, I was able to see how like the measurement of the actual training where it's like, hey, we can't have as many harvests per year if we don't top at this week. if we don't give it this time for recovery, we can't flip as quick. So it would slow down 3 harvests, which are, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in that case. So you really see the precision of when and how and what, how much, which plants they do it with. But everything had its exact time. 3 weeks in veg, we're topping. 5 weeks in, low stress training from topping. 7 weeks in, Schwazy. I'm like, oh man, we're going crazy over here. But it was always the same. And it was routine. And those plants were uniform and predictable. With home growers, I feel like a lot of us are our own scientists and we figure it out on our own. We don't do much precise. We don't do training techniques. We're not precision training. You know what I'm saying? Do you have anything that you'd recommend for somebody who's trying to do stuff that wouldn't have them just throwing the wall hoping it sticks? You know, because a lot of us kind of do that. Both. All. I'll answer mine at the end. So for me, I like to grow a plant the first time and see how, like you said, the morphology, see how it grows first. Because if I just say, well, I'm going to top this one, low stress train this, again, the Chill Out OG was naturally squatty and already was working a canopy out as it grew. So I didn't have to take all that extra time to do it with this plant. But then next to it, I've got the East Coast Sour Diesel with Tom Hill Hayes, which was lanky and goofy. So immediately I'm like, I'm going to top these two. I had to mark it down in my journalist stuff because I've got 6 different plants in there, and 3 out of the 6 I did totally different training techniques to. But I still need to maintain the same canopy because they're all going into flower together. So somebody who's just starting, I feel like they should let that plant grow a little bit before jumping in and saying, all right, top it this week, low stress train it this week. Like, look at how the plant's growing. Like Chris was saying, if it's a sativa, heavy air quotes, and it's lanky, maybe you want to consider cutting that top now and not just letting her grow and doing the howdy doody, so to speak. What about you? Or either?
I got nothing to add to that. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah?
Yeah, you know,
I know you both do that, so it kind of like we all kind of have a similar approach. It's like, well, I don't know the genetics yet.
Yeah, I don't really top, to be honest with you. It's I'll top if I've got to. I just don't think you have to. I'll get the same results if I just bending her down, getting rid of it. I guess, yeah, if things are getting too tall, to be quite honest, I just cull it. I don't have time for that. So
You won't even seeing that. That's the thing we were just talking about is like, if you want to see how that plant grows, that's how you'll know. Your training technique is your training technique. If it doesn't fit within your style,
that's it. I don't
she's
have
gone.
space.
But that's a lie. That is a lie.
You're a
Let's
liar.
back up
Uh-oh.
to a couple years ago.
A Maui Wowie?
How many years? What the heck is the name of this plant, dude? You had a
the
plant.
dirty dog, or the new dog.
You got to talk about that, man.
Yeah,
the
the
thing
new
was like 4 feet tall, and you did low stress training on it at that point.
Yeah.
And some people think that's not even you can impossible.
It was,
but you did it.
yeah.
We sainted.
This plant was 5 feet tall, and it was just because I was growing with just relatively small LEDs in a large room, and it just sprouted up and it got way too high, out of control. I think I might have traveled. And this is actually the turning point. This is why I don't grow tall plants anymore, is because it's just so much work.
He's like, you're right, and I never did it again.
Never did it again. That's it. That was the last one. The Maui Wowie, I guess, would have been the next closest one, but I didn't let her finish. I took it was a new dog. I wish I could give you the breeder, but it got 5 feet tall, and I just thought, instead of culling it, I'm going to just take it at about the 2 foot mark and just snap it down. And I snapped it down, but then it was sticking out from the pot by about another 3 feet. So then I just took it and I just started bending it around the pot and to try to twist it as like a kind of like a spiral. And it did. It worked wonderfully. I just managed to keep it all above the pot. And man, that thing harvested me probably close to like half to 3/4 of a pound just from lanky long legs. So
How was the quality?
it was great. Actually, quite frankly, it was some of the better herb I've ever
Yeah,
had.
he's like, everything about it was awesome. Never
was
did it
really
again,
good,
though.
but I'm never going to do it
I
again.
hated everything about it. It was an amazing experience.
I have you're right though. I have a technique that I've established over years, and I find what works for me. I have found what works for me, and I try to exercise that. If I've got one that doesn't fit in like the rest of them, I don't have the space, I don't have the time to make it work. So it's you're in or you're out.
That's a smart process. A lot of commercial growers do that, where they're like, "I'd love to keep that, but it doesn't fit our canopy."
Genetics.
Yeah,
I won't argue that.
Then you'd almost monocrop and like, I'm just gonna only do a run. That's what I was doing with Headbanger for a while. It's like this thing's always hungrier, and then it's not as hungry, and it needs to grow longer, and it doesn't like to train. Like, it's just finicky. I can't put it with everything else because then I have this weird canopy, and this one's a little yellowy. So I'm like, I'm just only growing a Headbanger each run by itself, and then I'm growing other ones as mixes. I think that's where a lot of times it's like, if it's that good, you can just utilize your training techniques only on that cultivar that time, because it becomes muddy when you try to make a universal approach to everything. Even with the drybacks, that's something where some cultivars didn't make a difference. Like it was like, yeah, plants are still big, but the COAs didn't show any difference. The yield was like a pinch more of larf, but nothing that made up for doing the extra stuff. So I think there's a lot of stuff, like we've said probably in every video, that's situational. Too many variables to say this is the only way to do it. But I feel like if you're not utilizing some training techniques to your plants and you're just letting it grow to see its own morphology forever, you're definitely not getting the most out of it. You can extend that lanky plant if you start training it when it's really young and start hitting it with a topping right out of the gate, then a low stress train, then maybe a super crop. And this big lanky plant now is this thick little beast because you've trained it, you know?
Yeah. And there are so many stress techniques you can do. Let's move on to lighting stress.
Ooh.
That's a good one, because when we talk about light stress,
Get a little bit of UVs.
I don't think people are really using it in order to increase yield or increase quality. It's really doing more harm to the plant. However, people are using it as a precision stress technique when it comes to breeding, right? They are giving light stress because this excess light could cause the plant to herm, throw out nanners, right? If you find that in your population, you don't want to use those to breed with. So a lot of people are using precision light stress in breeding. But as far as just growing for yield or growing for quality, light stress isn't something that you're really going to do to your plants, right?
No, I see the only people doing that is pushing it to the point of where you're exceeding your recommended ppfd, but you're also supplementing CO2. So you're making it so your plants can take more. But I swear on everything I know, every time that's the case, the bud is big, it's pretty, it's great, but it's just something a little lackluster. It's like they pushed it so much into growth. It's like a super buff dude who's trying to be an MMA. Usually they can't fight a lick, but they look like the part. They play the part, but like Brock Lesnar, like, unless you're fighting old man Randy Couture, somebody small, I'm going to send a Cain Velasquez, a little tiny little somewhat decent sized Mexican cat to light you up, because there's just better techniques, better process. I think people who are pushing their plants too much with lighting can potentially increase their yield. So I guess if that's your goal, you could do that. But then again, you have to supplement with increasing your environmental or your ambient CO2, the environmental impact of increasing that, along with nutrients as well. You can utilize some high frequency fertigation techniques along with the lighting with your CO2 that'll make it so you can push the plant more, and you will see, larger size buds. But I've never noticed better terpenes or prevalent quality increases that make me want to do it. And that's always from day one what I've grown for is better quality. Do you ever utilize any sort of lighting, like pushing your plants more with lighting at all? I mean, you got a beast of a light too in your tent. I'm looking right at you, boy. Right at you.
No.
He's like, nah, I don't do that. Just turn it on.
No. I ain't got time for that.
Turn the light on and go.
I don't understand the light techniques and stuff like that. I understand that some people would do like a little train, like the 24 dark or light now before harvest. I don't know if we would refer to that as anything precise, if whether or not it even has any benefit.
Could be bro science.
I'll be quite honest with you with the power of today's lights. It's really like a hang on for dear life. I just feel like I'm using such a beast of a light.
Yeah.
Where it's like I'm week 6 of veg and I'm at like 50-60% of the light
generously.
And so I'm kind of like, I feel like just having just a really good powerful light is like a great technique all in its own. I'm not using insufficient technology. I've got state of the art stuff, and that allows me to keep my game at the top. And if I was to mess with that, I'd be nervous.
Would you consider UV lighting a stress technique?
I use
Would you consider that a form of a
sure
stress technique?
It's precise.
I mean, you're increasing your trichomes.
Trying to increase
by
triclomes.
Your triclones, by on different strands by essentially increasing
We've
light.
lost all respect from our audience.
We say things wrong on purpose for those that are maybe tuning into this episode and haven't tuned into past episodes. We have purposely
These are
say
inside
some
jokes
words
or
wrong.
inside the stashers. All the stashers know.
Inside joke.
I'm not talking to you. You know. But anyone else who's new here,
yeah, I would argue that adding UV and UVB
would that, but yeah,
or
I mean,
even more, maybe even more so UVB than UV.
You're kind of looking at it as a stress technique. I mean, the plant's increasing trichome production oftentimes from stress. I've seen people swear by when they have a pest infestation that the flower, while the buds are smaller, somehow the trichomes are ridiculous. And I feel like it's because the plant is trying to save itself. It's a defense mechanism in the wild, So you think with this light, this is too in the sun wouldn't be giving this powerful of, and especially this, 3 hours at the last 3 weeks precisely putting in exactly when you're going to be utilizing UV lighting, that wouldn't be a normal thing that you'd see from the sun necessarily. I guess maybe at the end of the season. But this would be an artificial technique that you're doing to increase terpenes and trichome production.
Yeah, you're right. So yeah, lighting stress for sure.
That
I didn't even think that off the bat. I was thinking more so of like the amount of light.
That's initially what I was
with
thinking.
The amount of photons that are coming down and causing that stress or that burn.
That'd be a negative technique.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I was like, I don't think anybody could really use that as a benefit.
Don't do
except
that.
For in the breeding side of things, where they're trying to make sure that there's no traits that are going to flip it over to be herm, like I mentioned.
That's totally accurate, though. I never thought about that. That's a positive precision stress technique for someone who's trying to get seeds.
Yeah.
Not someone who's not. Someone who's not, they're going to do the opposite. We're trying to get better flower. We're not growing for reproduction. We're growing just for the main flower. That's it.
Depends on your goal.
Yeah. So I think utilizing different light techniques could definitely be there. These things usually aren't just a free situation. You're buying UV lighting. Some lights now are incorporating this more, but you're paying for an additional light. I know Shane from My Grow's got a great one. I've got 2 of them at My Grow I utilize. Funny, My Grow. And you barely have to use the lights. 3 hours for the last 3 weeks. That like ballpark, like not much at all, man. Like very, very minimal. So it's not like it's a lot more in your electricity, but it's buying another light fixture that becomes this new technique versus things like pinching the plant. These are just this is your time difference versus paying for something. That's a whole different conversation. Is it worth it? Can you justify it in some cases? Some would argue otherwise. Some science will say otherwise, but I'm convinced that I'm seeing big differences. Crazy terps at the end.
Yeah, you could we kind of touched on it earlier, but you could kind of put high frequency fertigation in there as well. Then giving precise feeding.
Yeah, because you're pushing it. Yeah. Technically, just like you're saying with the light argument there, you're pushing it. I mean, I saw as high as like 8.3 EC early on. I'm like, what are you guys doing? But it was all part of the SOP, and then these plants blow up, dude. Like I'm talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks of veg, and they're like as big as the tripod here, dude. They're massive plants, but it's because they're literally doing like a high push early and then dropping it down so the plant can obtain and eat the food. They're like running the food through the root system super, super quick.
Yeah, let's talk about that next. I mean, overfeeding, underfeeding, right? Yeah. Those are forms of stress that people do for different reasons, right?
I think that a lot of people don't do it intentionally, and it'll happen. And they'll be like, oh, wow, look at this. What happened? Yeah. And then they'll be like, this is one of the best results. Dude, like the leaves were this is the best yield I've ever had, and smoke it, dude. And it's like, well, why did this happen?
Show their friend their plant that's yellowing. And like, I'm just doing some precision stress techniques.
Yeah, these you don't understand.
Don't worry, it's underfeeding.
Yeah, it's under control.
It's supposed to look like that. That's what I'm telling you guys about my garden. It's all precision, boys.
This is where the automatic watering comes into place. When you're able to feed your plant, 13 times a day with just drips and drips and drips of water, but at high EC. So essentially there's a lot of food, but small amounts. Again, you're almost working your plant like a competitive eater, where you're stretching the stomach so it could eat more and take up more food versus just trying to force feed a bunch of food. It's a technique that's expanding its stomach, so to speak. And then now it could eat more and it could grow more. Like that's how you get a massive football player. I mean, look at your kid. He downs the food. He was eating our food after we ate it. He was like, oh, I'll take more.
He eats
Not
more
even
than
a big kid, but he uses so much energy to grow with the sports that he's in. That's the same thing as we're training our plants heavily to utilize these techniques for food. That's the energy. It's like
and
the
light food itself is precise. Remember, we've talked about this a few weeks ago in regards to 70s, 80s, and 90s growth was Miracle Grow. The food was not precise for this plant. It was for tomatoes and orchids and tulips and vegetables. And then we started to have a nutrient regimen, or companies were starting to put food together that was specific for this plant. And then you really started to see this plant take off. It's no brainer to me that we had percentages in the 70s and 80s of 5, 10, 15%. And then all of a sudden we started meeting their nutritional needs. Thank you.
Who's testing the THC then? You think they're testing old bud that somebody had from the 70s and like the 2000s, and they're like, it's only 5%. Like, yeah, it's this old bud.
Yeah, it's been around for 40 years.
Like, well, I had it in a sandwich bag. Like,
I kept this in my sock drawer.
Preserved is pretty good.
Who was testing?
Who was doing it back then? Yeah, I don't.
It was illegal everywhere. Who was testing it?
The feds. I don't know.
They're rewriting our history and telling us this was all swag you smoked back then. It wasn't
today
good.
is 20 times what it was back then.
Meanwhile, we were probably smoking 30% back then, and You weren't even alive.
I think it's a great conversation. It's no brainer to me that this plant, over the evolution of its existence, has gone from being something that's so unruly. It goes tall. It's bushy. It's got no real control to be harnessed. Whereas over the years of human intervention, we have precisely honed this plant in to give us exactly what we want at the levels that we want in the climate to which we exist. And I am very excited to see where we go for the next 50 to 100 years, to see what happens as we continue to precisely train and provide exactly what this plant needs for the best optimal desire.
Well, it's like our female plants we were growing before were just like regular small little plants. Now always look like China the wrestler, like tanks, you know? And they're like, what do you need, brother? Because we've trained them to that point of the next level of evolution of the plant.
Right. I mean, we haven't even talked about the temperature stress, temperature stress, the high stress, low stress. I don't know if we want to
let's do it. We got a couple minutes here real quick. The cold temperatures.
High temps and cold temps. I mean, that's precision stress as well, right? So now with the high temps, that's something I stress my plants with most of the time, not wanting to, right? The temperatures gets a little too high in the summertime, right? And stress happens in regards to foxtailing. That's a stress technique that happens.
Even herming potentially too. I've seen that from heat.
Yep, exactly. Tacoing the leaves. So there's stress that can have adverse effects on the plant, of course. Now, does increase in temperature, could that potentially lead to higher photosynthesis and higher yield, potentially better quality? Some say yes if you're increasing those other inputs.
Yeah.
And we've got a visitor here.
Oh yeah, we got guests on the podcast.
We got guests on the way.
Well, I think with the heat, depending on the cultivar, where it originates from, that could be part of it too, where it actually likes it better. And with cold, you could have situations where it grows more in like a mountainous region, Russia, and now it grows better there. It likes that colder climate. It likes to be able to be chilled more. Or again, I've seen people swear by better trichome production or colors by manipulating the temperature. You see in commercial grows, they'll drop it down heavy to change the pigment a little bit of the color.
Yep. Yeah, lowering the temps, another precision stress technique. Some people do the ice flushing. Try to bring out some of those colors. Shout out to my brotocalturists. But yeah, lowering the temps too. I do that towards the end of the grow. I do it, I wouldn't say it's to a level where it's stressing the plant, at least to preserve terpenes, in between 76, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Lowering it down even more into the 60s, sure, that's a stress that's going to bring out some of the purple pigment, right? And so some people do that in order for bag appeal, color, bring out those colors.
Coolest.
Do any temp stress?
Yeah, cold temps in particular.
Temps.
Yeah, I like to see that change in color.
I'm a purple
kind of guy. Yeah, imagine that.
Like we
call that precision stress. Yeah.
He's like, what we do is we just go to bed at night. We wake up
and it's
like
purple,
48 degrees,
and it's purple. Man. Yeah, and she's really floppy.
The purple weed came from Canada. That's where it all originated.
But honestly, I think you could get into a number of more training techniques that would help you precisely grow this incredible plant that we have.
Hey, we have a guest, and we got to smoke a blunt.
That's right. And I want to pass a question off to you guys. Are there any techniques that you guys use to get the desired results that create a garden that meet your needs and desires? We want to hear from you.
What are some techniques maybe that we skimmed over, we didn't really touch on? These are things that we utilize. We're not going over everything in the glossary. We're going over stuff that we've actually done and sharing that experience. So if there's some things you've done, drop it in the comments. Let us know,
just an open conversation, freestyle, just kind of what comes to mind, what we do. Like, there's certainly things we could have missed. So drop that in the comment section.
Not a single one of these are written.
Thank you so much to our patrons. We appreciate you guys. Thank you to all our premium members for being our top supporters. But thanks to all of our Patreons for believing in us. We'll see you guys probably on the next stream on Discord live with our patrons. Yeah, everyone else, we'll catch you out next week. I'm Pigeons. That's Mr. Grow It. That's Rob.
I'm Rob.
Welcome to From the Stash. Shout out to Wink.
Peace.
Peace.